Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Let's go, first of all, to reference my last video, which was kind of a news extra on the Kinzhal attacks on Kryvyi Rih and the Chonhar Bridge, just to remind you where Kryvyi Rih is here. And I was talking about perhaps the 3 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles were actually being targeted at the dam at Kryvyi Rih, and they missed. But I was unsure whether that really was the target. There's a lot of unknowns. Well, it turns out that advisor to the head of office of the president, Mikhailo Podolyak, confirmed the Russian attempt to attack the Kryvyi Rih dam with Kinzhal missiles, saying Russia is unable to keep hold of Enerhodar in the medium term and therefore is currently considering a large-scale terrorist attack on the nuclear power plant to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive and create a depopulated sanctuary grey zone fixed for the next year as part of the territorial status quo without ceasefire. This strategy also includes attempts to attack the dam in Kryvyi Rih with Kinzhals. Additional mining of the nuclear power plant, including the cooling ponds, is currently underway. Whether the Kremlin decides to go ahead with this scenario today depends solely on the reaction of the global world. The red lines have to be defined. The consequences must be announced. Not tomorrow, today. It's really serious stuff, actually. So, first of all, that is, well, a declaration from the Ukrainians. Again, we're not completely sure, but the Ukrainians are saying that, yes, the dam was aimed for. And as I said before, with the hydroelectric power plant, the dam at Novokakhovka, I put of the ramifications that particular dam could, or that particular flooding could well spell a global food crisis, considering which is fed by water from the dam. That also will affect Crimea. That will also affect to the north here as well. So this is huge. And then, of course, you've got the pollution pouring into the Black Sea. You've got the human effect. So much biodiversity, ecosystems being destroyed, so much affected there, and of course energy as well, that I think that will do as much damage that as a tactical nuclear missile would, which, yes, tactical nuclear missiles would be terrible for like a square kilometer, and that might cause, some radiation winds, but the global reaction to that would have been absolutely massive. Everyone would have piled in on Russia. It would have been the red line crossed. NATO would be hitting Russian naval assets all over the world. I think, well, I'm pretty sure actually it's been quite widely reported that Putin has been very much warned what would happen if nuclear missiles are used. And so that's why he's really not going to cross that red line. But here, they've blown up a dam and caused all this destruction, and everyone's like, oh, that's terrible. And then kind of like gets on with their lives. There's no kind of real repercussions for Russia here. I think it's absolutely terrible. And they appear to be aiming for other dams as well, which would cause catastrophe downstream from there. In fact, there was a theory, I think it was Georgie, that was saying that there was talk about a dam near Kiev being hit. And if that dam up here gets hit, the idea was they were worried that that would actually have like a domino effect with the sheer volume of water pushing down on other dams. It would just actually cause catastrophe all the way down this kind of chain of dams and whatnot, down these reservoirs, so on and so forth, further on, and perhaps, all the way to Zaporizhia. Now, if they were serious with that, I mean, that's absolutely horrific. This dam here, while not being as catastrophic as a Kiev dam, I won't imagine, is still a really, really dodgy thing to try. I mean, most things that Russia are trying in this war are dodgy, but this is particularly heinous, I think. So I think it's close to being a really serious red line that the world has to deal with. Anyway, moving on from that subject, we'll go on to bad appraisal of what is going on, particularly in the Zaporizhia direction as far as the counteroffensive is going. So CNN reports the early stages of the Ukrainian counteroffensive are not meeting expectations, according to Western officials. Now, who are these people? Is this actually correct? Don't know. We can't verify any of this, but let's just see what CNN say here. In its early phases, Ukraine's counteroffensive is having less success, and Russian forces are showing more competence than Western assessments expected, two Western officials and a senior US military official tell CNN. So that's actually three officials there. The counteroffensive is, quote, not meeting expectations on any front, one of the officials said. According to the Western assessments, Russian lines of defense have been proving well fortified, making it difficult for Ukrainian forces to breach them. In addition, Russian forces have had success bogging down Ukrainian armor with missile attacks and mines, and have been deploying air power more effectively. Part of me wonders whether is having less success than Western assessments expected says more about the Western assessments than the actual counteroffensive. I don't know what they were imagining, just waltzing through defensive lines, waltzing through minefields, going, oh, turns out none of them blew up. Brilliant. Jumping over trenches with Bradleys on pogo sticks or something. I mean, I don't get what you would expect. I was saying this is going to be tough, and don't shrug off these minefields and defenses. They are significant. And lo and behold, that's exactly what has happened. Now, if I can give that as a what I think is turning out to be a broadly accurate assessment of how the counteroffensive would go, I don't know what these Western experts are doing. So anyway, Ukrainian forces are proving vulnerable to minefields and Russian forces competent in their defense, one of the officials said. The officials cautioned that the counteroffensive is still in its early stages and that the US and its allies remain optimistic Ukrainian forces will be able to make territorial gains over time. The US and its allies are likely to wait until at least July for a fuller assessment of the progress of the counteroffensive, which was gradually launched over the last few weeks and is seen as crucial to determining who ultimately wins the war which was launched when Russia invaded last year. In addition, those officials note that Ukrainian forces have themselves been adapting to Russian tactics and defenses, including carrying out more dismounted operations. That's something I've been talking about myself. So they drive in the troops and get the mechanized equipment out of there so that they aren't vulnerable to being taken out. And then it's the dismounted troops that are doing the work of securing these positions. In recent days, Ukrainian forces have also made more success targeting and shooting down Russian aircraft. Several officials told CNN that adverse weather was proving an issue for Ukrainian forces. I don't know that's still the problem. I know there was a bit of an issue at the beginning of the counteroffensive. I don't know that's still there's still that much rain. I've not seen any, and the conditions have seemed pretty favourable to me. The weather has been playing. The Ukrainian casualties are heavy, though not as bad as the Russians are trying to portray, one of the officials says. That's broadly my opinion, that, yeah, they are taking heavy casualties, but it's nowhere near what the Russians... But that's a bit of a dampener on those who are generally pretty positive, but I think it's more likely just a dose of realism. Catching up with... Realism is catching up with some of these analysts, but hey, what do I know? I love this from Max23. Prigozhin and Gherkin, well, it's not from him, it's from Cherevati. Prigozhin and Gherkin are my favourites. They are doing a great job of demoralising the Russian armed forces. Speaker of the Eastern Group of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Cherevati, has said, I love it, bit of trolling there, that, yeah, Prigozhin and Gherkin are awesome. They are they're speaking truth to Russian MOD power, and they are being very critical, demoralising, do a really good job of demoralising the already low Russian morale. On a slightly more positive front, the area north of Marinka, this is just a little bit of an update, a teaser maybe for tomorrow. In the area north of Marinka, the AFU has made progress. Russia's defensive line were recently taken over, creating a bigger buffer zone. We'll map this later. Just to let you know, that was the area I was talking about earlier today. Andrew Perpetua was talking about this railway line here, where the Ukrainians have made some advances. So there could be some success there, up to a kilometre of Ukrainian gains. Right, I just wanted to have a little look at the figures for the Ukrainian the Russian losses, as according to the Ukrainian General Staff. Just have a look at some of the trends, see what's happened over the last couple of weeks since the counteroffensive has started. I said I would do this. Remember, the trend line is this yellow or orange dotted line. So you can see it's ticking up. This is personnel. You see it's ticking up there. I need to obviously move my stupid face. Oops. There we go. Right. So the trend lines here are ticking up for personnel. We have seen a big uptick back towards the 1,000 on a few of these days, and then down around the sort of 500 to 600 for the other days. More recently, last week or so, there was just that one day 3 days ago, 2, 3, and some other hits. So that is an uptick from after the. I guess it was the heavy fighting, particularly in Bakhmut, but also Avdiivka and as ever Marinka would be leading to those figures, but certainly Bakhmut, that was in sort of February time, January, February, and into March, and it sort of dipped down. If we look at tanks, yeah, we had a bit of a decent patch here for the Ukrainians, seeing a slightly steeper line going there. The trend is going upwards somewhat, and the same was for APVs, but actually since in the last week that's dipped back down. That's interesting, but I don't know, doesn't look like it's going down. This area looks more, I don't know, over there, I guess. Yeah, anyway, APVs not as good in the last week, but was ticking upwards during the first week of the counter-offensive. Artillery is where the Ukrainians are having huge amounts of success. I mean, if you look at these numbers here, they are huge, and that represents or is represented by this really significant rise in the trend line, and the blue line is a lot steeper. When the blue line is shallower, it means that the totals are increasing at a slower rate. Okay, so each successive day doesn't add that much. So when you look here, you've got maybe the quietest area, and it's almost flat there. When it's steeper, you're losing much greater numbers of whatever category it is. So in this case, it's a really steep incline in that. Multiple launch rocket systems, a little bit of an increase as well, perhaps, over the counter-offensive. Anti-aircraft warfare systems, very much so. Again, I think you're seeing last and before, as there was shaping operations before the counter-offensive, you are continuing to see large numbers of anti-aircraft warfare systems getting taken out. Aircraft, not so much. Helicopters, a little bit. You can see there, we've got a trend line going upwards. Obviously, the numbers for helicopters are going to be much smaller than things like tanks and personnel, obviously. But that is still, I think, something to take note of there. And we'll pop across to vehicles and fuel tanks, and you can see that the trend line is definitely going upwards there. There have been a large number of these being taken out on a daily basis. So the counteroffensive is yielding some results for the Ukrainians in terms of an uptick in a number of categories for Russian losses. It'll be, well, who knows how this counteroffensive is going to evolve over the next week or so, over the next month, over the next 2 months. Is this going to be a long and grinding counteroffensive, or is it going to be a case of attritional and really difficult until that breach is made, and then it's like a dam breaking? The pressure mounts and mounts and mounts, and then eventually all hell lets loose. Right, let's go to another thread by Samuel Bendet. He's a bit of a sort of tech expert, says a lot about drones and comms and whatnot. Here he's doing a thread about communication problems still encountered by the Russian forces in Ukraine from a pro-Kremlin Telegram channel. Quote, "Nothing infuriates a commander more than the inability to get through to a subordinate. The problem objectively still exists and is not fully resolved at the systemic level. Every second or third volunteer donation is dealing in one way or another with comms tech. The requirements for comms tech are constantly growing. Chinese-made Baofengs radios often no longer meet the needs of the forces due to the enemy electronic warfare threat. Russian-made Azart radio systems still don't work well, and we do not just judge by volunteer efforts. In the most difficult combat areas, soldiers and officers write about the lack of communication with artillery, the lack of spare communication methods. One request to volunteers is to find a TA-57 old telephone for field-wide communication with a rotary knob. At the same time, the enemy uses electronic warfare, decoys uh, cell towers on their front line and aims them at ours. He knows about the Russian officer telegram chats and understands this is a spare and often the main channel for our command and control. In general, the problem seems to be very serious and it needs to be solved at the system level. Volunteers bought, huge thanks to them, hundreds, if not thousands, of radio stations. They are all different with different levels of security range and so on. According to the Telegram post, massive OPSEC issues still persist across the Russian forces a year and a half into this invasion. On a related note, the Russian government is going after Rostec after the defense giant was blamed for passing off the antenna systems purchased in China as a result of its work to develop SATCOMs for civilian and military use. And that's another story I might have to look into. But yeah, the calls to go back to these old kind of old school field telephones to do comms work. They were talking about laying wires down so they can have wired communication, which is not so susceptible to jamming and electronic warfare. But I don't know that they actually followed through on that. Right, we're going to go to Timothy Milovanov, who is an economist, works at the Kiev School of Economics, actually the president, and was an advisor to the Kiev administration. This is in the context of the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London that's been has taken place over the last few days. The atmosphere at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London is overwhelmingly upbeat. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak opened the event with these commitments and positions. Prior to the war, so number one, prior to the war, Ukraine was becoming a massive investment opportunity. It was known as the breadbasket of Europe, a top exporter of iron and steel, a leader in energy, and a hub for tech startups. Two, despite the war, Ukraine's economic opportunity remains intact, and the conflict has, in fact, underscored Ukraine's potential. Three, Ukraine has demonstrated an incredible spirit of strength, defiance, ingenuity, and innovation amidst the war. Four, Ukraine's citizens and tech experts have developed unique solutions to bolster the country's defenses. Five, Ukraine's energy grid, despite attempts by Russia to destroy it, was not only restored, but is now able to export electricity back to Europe, showcasing its resilience and ingenuity. Six, Russia's strategy has been to destroy what it cannot take, including Ukraine's economy. Seven, despite the 30% war-induced fall in GDP, I mean, that's absolutely catastrophic, Ukrainians continue to live and do business, supported by a government pushing for reform and openness to investment. Eight, the PM reaffirms that the UK, along with allies, will continue to support Ukraine's defence and recovery as long as it takes. Nine, it is essential for Russia to be held accountable for the destruction it has caused, with the UK exploring lawful routes to use Russian assets and sanctions to ensure this happens. 10, the recovery of Ukraine requires a partnership of governments, international financial institutions, and business leaders. 11, the UK is committing substantial support to Ukraine's economy, including $3 billion in loan guarantees and the launch of a UK-Ukraine tech bridge alongside significant support from the EU and other allies. 12, financial institutions like the IMF and EBRD are contributing significantly to Ukraine's recovery, with the IMF providing $15 billion over 4 years and the rest of the institutions $115 billion. The private sector is crucial to Ukraine's recovery, and the PM announcing the launch of the Ukraine Business Compact and revealing that over 400 businesses have signed up so far is all good news. 14, the PM announces the new London Conference framework for war risk insurance, aimed at helping insurers underwrite investments into Ukraine and boosting investor confidence. I mean, you forget things like this are necessary. You don't even consider stuff like this, which is, how do you get help into Ukraine? Well, investors, businesses are going to go in and do that, but then you need insurance. This is a risky sort of thing to do. Can they get their investments insured, and who provides that, and is that too risky, and so on and so forth. So yeah, lots of stuff goes on behind the scenes, I guess. The PM expresses confidence in Ukraine's spirit and resilience in point number 15. He actually told a story about a Ukrainian soldier planting seeds for future growth amidst a war and said it symbolizes the planting of seeds for Ukraine's future recovery. He concludes by promising to help Ukraine's economic success a reality. So actually, that that's really good, and well done, Rishi Sunak, and well done for that conference hosted in London. A really good thing, and it seems that it has produced a lot of really positive results. Okay, going on to the last couple of things now. We have Chris Owicki, another thread by him. This is about desertions from the Russian army. It's not a huge thread, but it's worth sharing with you. The Russian army is having an increasing problem with desertions, according to a leaked document which appears to show hundreds of men deserting from the VDV, that the Russian airborne forces, the paratroopers, since the 1st of February 2023. The document, which has been published by a Russian channel, is likely to come from the military prosecutor's office. It summarizes criminal offences in the VDV over an unclear time frame, probably starting from the 1st of February 2023. It states that there have been 325 cases of absence without leave, AWOL or SOC in Russian, of which 228 men have been recovered and a further 97 are still wanted, given that the VDV likely has around 40,000 men, 45,000 pre-war. This may represent nearly 1% of the total. Case lists from Russian military courts have reportedly shown an increasing number of desertion cases being heard. The VDV has suffered many heavy casualties during the war, so it's likely that this will have had an effect on its members' morale. It's also of interest that the document records 29 deaths during this period, 6 of them resulting from presumably criminal incidents, scare quotes, incidents. Another 4 cases of inflicted serious bodily harm were recorded. These were likely the results of fights between soldiers. All of this represents a kind of lack of morale in, well, here, one of the elite forces, one of the elite units, or number of units. It's the paratroopers that have suffered from force quality reduction as they have had to take on board troops from or arguably some are saying maybe even untrained troops straight into their ranks. And what normally happens with the VDV is they would take the cream of already trained troops from other units and say, do you want to come and join the airborne forces, the VDV? And they take the best, take the cream off the top, and that's what makes the elite forces here. But what's happened over the course of the war is they've taken so many casualties that they can't take the cream of the crop from the other units, because the other units are decimated and they're fighting everywhere. So they basically had to recruit either any soldier or even, arguably, some rumors that they are recruiting sort of mobilized troops as well, which means that their force quality is really, really deteriorated from what it was at the beginning of the war. And that, I think, is pretty significant. Okay. Last thing I want to say today was going to concern Semyon Pegov, who is also known as War Gonzo. He's a Russian ultra-nationalist military blogger. He's supposed to have been shot in a trench. There's footage widely available. I've seen it a number of times. I'm pretty sure it is him who has died. There are quite a few indications that it's him. I'm going to probably do a more organized segment on him tomorrow in my extra then, just to let you know. I had recorded this earlier, but it's a bit of a mishmash. So I'll save that for tomorrow. You guys can look up, see what you think about whether he has been killed. That would be quite an embarrassing loss, I guess, to the Russians. He's one of the big proponents of their ultra-nationalist narrative. And if he's died in the war, let me know what you think, whether he has died, and I'll try and put a little bit together tomorrow about him. In the meantime, take care. Thanks so much for your support. Really appreciate it. All the very best. I'll speak to you tomorrow.